October 19th, 1982, an American occultist named Michael Aquino entered the North Tower of Wewelsburg Castle in West Germany. According to the account he later gave, Aquino obtained the keys to a subterranean chamber beneath the tower, went inside alone, and performed a ritual that he believed would bring an old magical idea into a new form. The chamber had been constructed during the Nazi occupation of the castle. Today, the museum simply calls it the crypt. Aquino called it Walhalla, with a W, or the Hall of the Dead. He was already the founder and high priest of the Temple of Set. He had previously served as one of Anton LaVey's closest associates in the Church of Satan. He was also a commissioned officer in the United States Army, a political scientist, and a specialist in psychological operations. Now, those are several lives to fit inside one person. Aquino later wrote, after completing the ritual, he returned the keys to the castle's caretaker and sketched a new occult insignia on a desk in the caretaker's office. He then traveled south to the Eagle's Nest at Obersalzberg, where Adolf Hitler had once received guests. Aquino claimed he completed the emblem's mathematical proportions while sitting at a table in Eva Braun's former tea room. The design contained an inverted pentagram, flames, angular forms, an Egyptian scepter, and a series of hidden trapezoids. Its measurements were supposedly arranged according to the golden ratio. That emblem became the symbol of a secretive, modern, magical fraternity called the Order of the Trapezoid. The order describes itself as a chivalric knighthood devoted to the Prince of Darkness, the protection of something called the Black Flame, the pursuit of a hidden mystery named Runa, and a grail quest that continues beyond physical death, which is a lot to take in before breakfast, but I don't know when you're listening to this. There are medieval castles, Lovecraftian monsters, Norse gods, sacred geometry, psychological warfare, and a private Necronomicon. Somehow, all of these things end up inside the same trapezoid. I think the obvious question when it comes to secret societies is whether any of this is real. The less obvious question is what we mean by real. Because the Order of the Trapezoid is a genuine organization. It has a documented history, named leaders, internal publications, membership requirements, and an active public website. Its mythology, however, was deliberately assembled from horror fiction, Germanic legend, ceremonial magic, and the remains of a Nazi monument. This is a story about the moment when fiction enters a ritual chamber and comes back out wearing a uniform. Welcome to Idiot Mystic. Today, we're going inside the Order of the Trapezoid. Before we enter the castle, we need to clear up a basic problem. There have been two related organizations called the Order of the Trapezoid. The first developed around Anton LaVey and the early Church of Satan in San Francisco. By 1970, LaVey described the order as the church's board of directors and security staff. It operated as an elite governing body whose full membership was reportedly known only to the high priest. The second version emerged within Michael Aquino's Temple of Set. This newer order borrowed the name and symbolism from LaVey, then transformed the concept into a school of magical initiation modeled after a chivalric brotherhood. The official order now describes itself as one of the oldest surviving internal orders of the Temple of Set. So the order did not come down through an unbroken line of medieval knights. There is no documented chain connecting it to the Crusades, the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Order, or another forgotten brotherhood guarding an underground polygon. Its historical life begins in 20th century America. Its imaginative life begins much earlier, inside legends about strange stones, forbidden knowledge, hidden chambers, and people who stare at things for way too long. The public-facing version of the order is currently led by Toby Chappell, whom its website identifies as its 7th Grand Master. Anyone hoping to join must first enter the Temple of Set, complete its initiatory training, reach the degree of Adept, find a knight willing to act as a sponsor, then undergo a period of testing, and finally take an oath before an authorized officer of the order. That is the organization in plain terms, a selective initiatory school within a larger occult religion. But the language used by the order is much less simple. Members call themselves knights and dames. Their central principles include the Black Flame, the Grail Quest, the Trapezoid, and Walhalla. Their work incorporates Germanic mythology, runes, math, altered states, martial arts, and something they call neo-mythology. Neo-mythology freaks me out, but I guess we should talk about it. It means they are aware that some of their mythology is modern and constructed. They're not necessarily pretending that every story came from an ancient manuscript found next to a dead monk. They treat the conscious creation of mythology as a magical practice of its own. That kind of changed my investigation into them, because we're dealing with people who might use fiction on purpose, while still believing that fiction can reveal the truth. A novel can be invented and still change the person reading it. A ritual can be newly written and still produce fear, focus, catharsis, or commitment. A symbol does not need to be 5,000 years old before people start organizing their lives around it. Humans can become emotionally attached to a restaurant logo within 3 visits. Give us a black stone from outer space and a castle, and you could build an entire metaphysical system by Thursday. The Order of the Trapezoid understands that very well. A trapezoid is one of the least threatening shapes imaginable. Most of us first encountered it on a school worksheet between a rhombus and a parallelogram. Nobody looked at the worksheet and thought, this is clearly a gate to immortality. Yet, occult systems have always been good at rescuing ordinary objects from ordinary life. A cup becomes the Holy Grail. A stick becomes a wand. A circle becomes protection. A triangle becomes manifestation. And a star can become an entire argument about the universe. The trapezoid brings a useful feeling to that symbolic vocabulary because it resembles a stable shape that has been pushed out of balance. The lines imply order, though the expected symmetry has gone missing. You could say a square feels settled, but a trapezoid looks as though someone has dragged the top of reality slightly to one side. I don't know, sometimes trapezoids freak me out. I think that visual instability appears constantly in horror as well as expressionist art. Crooked streets, tilted windows, ceilings that lean toward the person that's standing beneath them. The sets from movies like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari do this deliberately. Perspective can drive emotion, and architecture doesn't always have to line up with what we expect. Anton LaVey became fascinated with what he called the laws of the trapezoid. The order's own history says he connected the strange geometry in H.P. Lovecraft's fiction with ideas about harmful or negative architecture found in the French writer Roger de la Forest's book, Houses That Kill. LaVey proposed that certain spaces and angles could disturb ordinary people while becoming useful to a properly initiated magician. The magician would enter an environment that unsettled everyone else and somehow draw power from the imbalance. Now, there's no controlled scientific evidence showing that a trapezoid emits occult energy. I checked. Geometry still is pretty reluctant to become demonic when you put it under lab conditions. The psychological part is much easier to understand. Architecture affects attention, mood, movement, and bodily orientation. A low ceiling feels different from a cathedral vault. A narrow hallway changes the way we walk and breathe. A room with no visible exit can provoke anxiety before the conscious mind has worked out the reason. Stage designers, filmmakers, military planners, and theme park designers all manipulate space to shape behavior. They may use different language, though the underlying principle is familiar. Environment influences experience. LaVey's move was to turn that experience into an occult law. He also drew inspiration from the photographer William Mortensen, whose work often used dramatic staging, grotesque subjects, and deliberate control of the viewer's attention. Mortensen's book, The Command to Look, treated images as tools capable of reaching into the viewer and directing emotion. That idea fits LaVey perfectly. He approached ritual as theater with a psychological purpose. Clothing, music, light, architecture, blasphemous language could all be arranged to bypass the dull, respectable surface of a person and reach whatever was supposedly hiding underneath. The trapezoid became part of that theater. Still, the strongest influence didn't come from architecture, math, or photography. It came from a horror story. In 1936, H.P. Lovecraft published a story called The Haunter of the Dark. The story follows Robert Blake, a writer fascinated by the occult. From his window in Providence, Rhode Island, Blake notices an abandoned church rising above Federal Hill. The local community avoids the place. Birds seem reluctant to fly near it. Its windows have been blacked out. Blake does what every sensible protagonist in a horror story eventually does. He enters the building alone. Inside, he discovers evidence of an extinct religious group called the Church of Starry Wisdom. He also finds the skeleton of a reporter who had entered the church decades earlier and apparently failed to leave. The dead reporter's notes describe disappearances, rumors of blood sacrifice, and a strange object as the shining Trapezohedron. Lovecraft's Trapezohedron is not a flat trapezoid. It's a many-sided crystalline object contained inside an ornate metal box. By gazing into it, members of the Starry Wisdom sect could supposedly view distant worlds and receive knowledge from an entity called the Haunter of the Dark. The object acts as a window across time and space. Unfortunately, the window also looks back. Blake gazes into the stone and sees ancient landscapes, submerged cities, and vast regions of cosmic darkness. He senses a presence watching him from the other side. The entity becomes connected to his mind and begins trying to reach him. The haunter cannot tolerate light. Darkness allows it to move. This leads to one of Lovecraft's more effective horror setups. Blake watches the weather and the electrical supply with increasing panic because a citywide blackout could release the thing from the church. During a thunderstorm, the lights fail. The boundary collapses. By the end, Blake's identity seems to merge with the entity he summoned. His final writings identify the Haunter as an avatar of Nyarlathotep, Lovecraft's shape-changing messenger of universal chaos. There's a simple idea inside the story that becomes very important to everything that follows. Knowledge is a form of contact. Blake assumes he can look without participating. He wants visions, information, and perhaps a little material for his writing. Once he opens the line of communication, observation becomes relationship. The thing he studies acquires access to him. Anyone who has ever spent 3 hours looking up an obscure secret society and ended the evening with 37 tabs open will understand the early stages of this process. LaVey saw enormous ritual potential in Lovecraft. Lovecraft himself was a materialist and an atheist. He did not present the Cthulhu mythos as a revealed religion. His invented gods expressed a universe in which humanity occupies no privileged position. I think maybe that's why cosmic horror works, because the universe is vast, ancient, and largely indifferent to us. Occult practitioners later adopted his fictional entities anyway. I think there's something very 2026 about that, because an ancient deity arrives burdened by centuries of theology and interpretation, but a fictional deity comes with room available. Practitioners can build around it, revise it, and treat the author's stories as an open-source mythology. LaVey and Aquino both contributed Lovecraft-inspired rituals to the 1972 book, The Satanic Rituals. Aquino wrote The Ceremony of the Nine Angles and The Call to Cthulhu. These rituals moved Lovecraft's language out of the library and into this group's ceremonial practice. A horror writer invented a cult that used a strange crystal. A real occult movement then used the invented cult as inspiration. The line between fiction and religion didn't disappear. People just started crossing it in both directions. The name, Order of the Trapezoid, emerged from that crossing. By the 1950s and early 1960s, Anton LaVey had built a reputation as one of San Francisco's weirder local characters. He was an organist, animal trainer, occult lecturer, performer, and relentless self-mythologist. He shaved his head, dressed in black, kept exotic animals, and understood how to produce an image journalists could use. Some stories about LaVey's life were exaggerated or invented, and independent researchers have challenged many details in his authorized biographies. That doesn't make him less important, but it shows how thoroughly he understood that a public identity could function as a magical construction. LaVey gathered artists, writers, filmmakers, professionals, and eccentric socialites at his home, later known as the Black House. The Church of Satan's own history describes these meetings as the Magic Circle. The guest lists sound like somebody dropped several unrelated parties into the same room. Filmmaker Kenneth Anger, who I've talked about a lot in the series about Laurel Canyon and 1960s rock music, might appear alongside anthropologists, attorneys, tattoo artists, sci-fi writers, police officers, doctors, and people with professions that become increasingly more difficult to explain and still keep it PG. Members reportedly wore black and red medallions featuring an angular design and a bat-winged demon. This group became known as the Order of the Trapezoid. In 1966, LaVey formally established the Church of Satan. He presented Satan as a symbol of pride, carnality, rebellion, individualism, and resistance to religious hypocrisy. I'm just saying I don't agree with this, but let's move on. We're just talking about weird stuff from history. The church's philosophy was generally atheistic. Satan served as an archetype rather than a supernatural master requiring literal worship. I think this is just spiritual Satanism's way of kind of feeling better about what they're doing, because it doesn't matter if he serves as an archetype. They're still essentially worshipping the archetype through their actions and the way they live their lives. But anyway, ritual was still important. LaVey saw ceremony as a way of releasing emotion, concentrating desire, and creating psychological change. A person could enter the ritual chamber, suspend disbelief, scream, curse, grieve, lust, celebrate, or direct hatred toward a symbolic target. Afterwards, the pressure had somewhere to go. This is where LaVey becomes more interesting than the cartoon version of him. He mixed cynical showmanship with a serious belief in aesthetics. He understood that people require experiences, and philosophy alone does not always reach the parts of us that drive behavior. You can explain grief beautifully for an hour, and still find that one song that opens the door faster. LaVey designed rituals to open doors. By December 1970, the church's newsletter, appropriately named The Cloven Hoof, offered a more specific definition of the Order of the Trapezoid. It called the order the church's board of directors and security staff. Priests and priestesses entered automatically, while the identities of many members remained concealed, even from one another. The high priest alone supposedly knew the full membership of its governing council. At this stage, the order was mainly administrative and symbolic. It was the elite layer near the center of LaVey's organization. The secrecy made it sound grander. Calling something the administrative committee rarely inspires spiritual terror. Calling it the Grand Council of the Trapezoid immediately makes everybody wonder whether the meeting is taking place in a secret lair in a volcano. Secrecy also created a structure in which LaVey remained the central source of authority. This was an intentional move. He knew who belonged, he made appointments. The order's hidden nature reinforced his position as the person standing at the only visible doorway. This arrangement would become important when the Church of Satan split apart during the 1970s. One of the people leaving LaVey's circle was Michael Aquino, and he took the trapezoid with him. Michael Aquino joined the Church of Satan in 1969 and rose quickly through its hierarchy. He became an editor, ritual writer, member of the Council of Nine, and one of LaVey's most prominent representatives. His personality was very different from LaVey's public image. LaVey had the atmosphere of a midnight, adults-only carnival. Aquino looked like a man who might arrive to audit the carnival, reorganize it into 6 initiatory degrees, and provide everyone with a reading list. He held a doctorate in political science and served in the United States Army, including work connected to psychological operations. Now, that background has inspired a large number of conspiracy theories, and I can't really argue with them. The documented version is already weird enough, though. A military psychological operations specialist was helping develop the theology of one of the most prominent American occult organizations. Aquino gradually became dissatisfied with LaVey's direction. The decisive break came in 1975, after LaVey changed the Church's system of advancement. Aquino and other members believed that titles and degrees were becoming too closely connected to financial contributions and personal favor. Aquino responded by performing a ritual called the working of the North Solstice. He later claimed that the Egyptian god Set communicated with him and dictated a text called the Book of Coming Forth by Night. This so-called revelation established the theological basis for the Temple of Set. The new temple moved away from LaVey's largely atheistic use of Satan. Setians treat Set as an independently existing intelligence associated with self-awareness, separation, and the development of individual consciousness. Scholars disagree on whether the temple should be categorized as Satanism. Some describe it as esoteric or theistic Satanism because it emerged directly from the Church of Satan. The scholar Kenneth Granholm uses the term post-Satanism, which captures the temple's historical origin and its deliberate movement beyond Satan as its central symbol. It's important to notice this here because Satanism places an enormous emphasis on something called Seper, an Egyptian term commonly translated within the temple as to come into being. Seper describes conscious self-transformation. The practitioner works to become a more distinct, self-directed, and developed intelligence. The temple divides reality into the objective and the subjective universe. The objective universe includes the natural world and the shared systems around us. The subjective universe includes the individual's private world of interpretation, identity, and meaning. Magic operates across the relationship between them. Lesser black magic involves influencing people or circumstances through psychology, presentation, strategy, and an understanding of behavior. Greater black magic focuses on transforming the magician's own subjective universe. This can help explain why Aquino took symbolism so seriously. A symbol can exist in the objective world as ink, stone, or metal. Inside a subjective universe, that same symbol can organize memory, identity, and even purpose. The symbol may then affect behavior, which produces consequences back into the objective world. You don't need to believe that Set lives outside time to understand that loop. People change their clothes, posture, friends, schedule, and goals after adopting a new identity. Haven't you? We've all been through phases, right? Eventually, the world begins reacting to the person they have decided to become. The temple built a structured environment around that process. Its members progress through degrees called recognitions. The language is deliberate. The organization claims it cannot grant initiation as though handing someone a certificate. The individual supposedly initiates themselves through their work, while the temple recognizes the development that has already occurred. Members can join smaller local groups called pylons and specialized initiatory schools called orders. One of the oldest and most important of those schools became the Order of the Trapezoid. The shape that had functioned as LaVey's emblem and governing council was about to become an entire spiritual path. Now, we should probably talk about Wewelsburg Castle. It's real, in the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia. It sits above the... Sorry about my pronunciations, by the way. But it sits above the Alme Valley and has 3 wings joined into a triangular structure. The present castle was largely constructed between 1603 and 1609 as a residence for the prince-bishops of Paderborn. The triangular shape would later become part of its occult reputation, although its builders weren't preparing a Temple of Set conference center 4 centuries in advance. Heinrich Himmler first visited Wewelsburg in 1933. The following year, the SS leased the castle for 1 Reichsmark annually under a contract intended to last 100 years. Himmler initially planned to use it as a training school for SS officers. Those plans expanded as the power and ambition of the SS grew. The castle became a projected ideological center for the organization. Its exterior was altered to make it appear older, harsher, and more fortress-like. Nordic and Germanic symbols appeared throughout the interior. Himmler planned annual meetings of senior SS leaders and imagined the castle as a secluded gathering place for the elite of the Nazi racial state. By the early 1940s, the proposals had become enormous. Architectural plans placed the North Tower at the center of a vast circular complex that would have consumed much of the surrounding village. The project was never completed. Construction depended on forced labor. A concentration camp was established nearby, eventually becoming the independent Niederhagen-Wewelsburg camp. More than 3,900 people were deported there. According to the Wewelsburg Memorial Museum, at least 1,229 died through brutal labor, mistreatment, disease, and the conditions of imprisonment. Others were deliberately executed. I think any discussion of the castle's occult history has to remain attached to those facts. The building is visually dramatic, but I think the victims are the reason its history carries so much weight. There are 2 unfinished rooms in the North Tower. The upper chamber is usually called the I don't think I'll be able to say this word. The Obergruppenführersaal, or Hall of the Supreme SS Leaders. Stupid name. Its floor contains a 12-spoked sun wheel design that later occultists and far-right groups came to call the Black Sun. Below it is the circular stone crypt, sometimes called the Vault or Hall of the Dead. A pipe beneath the center of the floor may have been intended to feed an external flame. Popular documentaries often describe these chambers as proven sites of SS magical rituals. The museum says otherwise. Its historians state that neither room was used during the Nazi era and that no reliable evidence establishes their intended ceremonial function. Construction was unfinished when work stopped. Much of the elaborate occult mythology surrounding the chambers developed after the war. The SS absolutely used racial mythology, invented tradition, monumental architecture, runic imagery, and pseudo-history. Those elements served a violent political project, and that historical reality should be disturbing enough for you. Claims about regular midnight ceremonies, supernatural initiations, and secret magical energy beneath the tower obviously remain largely speculative, but I'm a speculator. This is one of the most important corrections in the entire story that kind of grounds us and isn't really pleasant to talk about. Wewelsburg was an ideological site connected to genocide, forced labor, and SS megalomania. Calling it an occult castle can accidentally turn historical crimes into spooky entertainment. It gives the perpetrators the mythic identity they wanted, while the prisoners become background scenery. But I'm just saying, let's not forget what actually happened there. The fantasy of Nazi occult power also makes fascism look more mysterious than it was. The SS didn't need supernatural forces to murder people. Bureaucracy, obedience, dehumanization, and ordinary human cruelty did the work quite effectively. So while that doesn't erase the castle's symbolic power, it does explain where much of that power comes from, at least in terms of the energy around it. Wewelsburg is a place where architecture, mythology, and state violence were intentionally woven together. By 1982, the castle had become a museum and youth hostel. A historical exhibition about SS ideology and terror opened the same year. Then Michael Aquino arrived and asked for the key to the crypt. The Order's current history gives a precise date for Aquino's ritual, October 19th, 1982. Some later academic summaries say 1983. Aquino's own account and the Order's archival material repeatedly use 1982, so that's the date I'm using here. We know very little about the ritual's exact contents from public sources. This is worth emphasizing because previous retellings have filled the chamber with invented chanting, robed knights, glowing crystals, thunder, and supernatural manifestations. There's no credible evidence, not that there ever is, that a Lovecraftian creature appeared beneath Wewelsburg. No police force interrupted the ceremony. No secret recording captures an inhuman voice. That would be an amazing podcast ending, but from what I can tell, there's no proof that it happened. Aquino described the ritual as a solitary working. He believed Wewelsburg represented the place where the mythic and artistic energies of German Romanticism had been captured and corrupted by National Socialism. His stated goal was to separate those energies from fascism and redirect them toward individual transformation. The Order's official history uses striking language to explain this. It describes German Romanticism through qualities such as dynamism, life worship, irrationality, artistic alchemy, and openness toward the foreign. It then says those qualities were distorted in totalitarianism, tribal hatred, and mass violence. Aquino believed a ritual could reclaim the earlier stream. He combined Germanic mythology with Lovecraftian expressionism, Setian philosophy with the angular magic he had developed during his years with LaVey. Afterwards, he declared the Order of the Trapezoid reconstituted as a chivalric order whose knights would uphold honor and ethical conduct. Funny. There's a bold contradiction inside that act. Aquino chose a location saturated with SS history and declared that the resulting magical current would be protected by ethics. Still, this is the oldest trick in the book, but hopefully neither of us are going to fall for it. The Order interpreted this as reclamation. Critics see appropriation, fascination, or an inability to understand how heavily the setting overwhelms the alleged attention. A ritual can't erase history. It also doesn't gain the moral authority to redefine a memorial site simply because the magician announces a purifying purpose. I've noticed this trend. People reclaiming hateful imagery, locations, and ideologies, saying that they're purifying them, or that things are good now. Aquino's relationship with Nazi imagery has remained one of the most controversial parts of his life, and rightfully so. His interest went beyond reading a book about German Romanticism. He visited sites connected to the Third Reich, collected objects, and wrote extensively about Wewelsburg. That created suspicion around him and the order, especially when combined with black uniforms, runes, titles of knighthood, and the language of elite initiation. The order has formally presented itself as opposed to racism and mass politics. Its own explanation frames Wewelsburg as a failed experiment in which myth was subordinated to totalitarianism. Independent researchers, like us, still have reasonable grounds to examine imagery critically. It's freaking Nazi stuff. Symbols gather history. You may intend to use one meaning, but the older meanings don't just disappear. The Order's Wewelsburg ritual is therefore both an origin story and an unresolved moral problem. The place gave the Order its atmosphere, its emblem, and its sense of destiny. But it also tied the Order permanently to a history that cannot be converted into neutral, magical scenery. Aquino believed the Rite brought a thought experiment to life. From that point onward, the Order would become more structured, more Germanic, and more elaborate. Its next major architect was Stephen Edred Flowers. In 1986, leadership of the Order passed to Stephen Edred Flowers, better known in occult circles as Edred Thorson. Flowers was an academic scholar of Germanic languages and runology. He also founded the Rune Guild, an initiatory organization devoted to the study and magical use of runes. Under his leadership, the Order's Northern European material became much more systematic. Aquino had created the dramatic center, the castle, the Wewelsburg working, the angular insignia, and the chivalric oath. Flowers built the curriculum. The Order's official history credits him with developing its Indo-European and Northern foundations, creating lodges and houses, establishing an inner council, and formulating a two-part initiatory system called the Polarian method. The Polarian method combines outer accomplishment with inner transformation. A member is expected to produce concrete results in ordinary life, while also engaging with mysteries that supposedly exceed ordinary reason and perception. This is a useful distinction because occult communities can become very good at producing impressive language around people whose electricity has been disconnected. If you know, you know. The Polarian ideal demands both dimensions. Your inner world should deepen, and your outer life should demonstrate competence. The North Star supplies the metaphor. Polaris appears fixed while the night sky turns around it. It gives orientation without traveling the road for you. For the Order, the initiate tries to develop a stable center while remaining capable of change. Flowers also introduced the term runa as a central magical concept. Runa is related to the word rune, though the Order uses it in a wider sense. It refers to the hidden mystery behind appearances, the unknown principle that keeps drawing the initiate deeper. A mystery can be solved. Runa continues moving. Each answer opens another question. The process of seeking becomes more important than reaching a final explanation. That approach connects naturally with the Order's Grail mythology. The Grail can never become a possession sitting safely on a shelf. It remains the object that reorganizes the person searching for it. Under Flowers, the Order developed a geometric symbol combining the pentagram and the angles of the trapezoid. It undertook workshops on runes and angular magic, organized internal houses, and eventually produced private material, including an Ordenbach. called the Codex Trapezoidicus. The order also compiled what it calls its own Necronomicon. That doesn't mean somebody found Lovecraft's fictional grimoire beneath an Iraqi archaeological site. The order openly describes its Necronomicon as a collection of original ritual and theoretical work inspired by writers such as Lovecraft, Arthur Machen, William Hope Hodgson, and Fritz Leiber. Again, neo-mythology. They create the forbidden book themselves. I think there's something both funny and interesting about that. People have spent decades searching for a real Necronomicon. The order's response is essentially, fine, we'll just make one. This reflects a major principle within modern occultism. Tradition can be received, reconstructed, invented, or all three at once. A new ritual may be wrapped around an old symbol. An ancient myth may survive through a modern translation that kind of changes half of it. A fictional book may inspire a real book that later practitioners treat as sacred. Once enough people inherit the invention, it becomes tradition. Flowers remained Grand Master for approximately 9 years. His influence continued through the order's runic studies, its use of the Grail, and its emphasis on disciplined self-development. By this point, the order had moved far beyond LaVey's hidden board of directors. The Order of the Trapezoid had become a complete school of occult identity. The modern order organizes its work around 4 central elements: the Black Flame, the Grail Quest, the Trapezoid, and Walhalla. These ideas overlap, so the easiest way to understand them is to treat them as 4 views of the same project. Within Setian thought, the black flame represents individual self-consciousness. It is the capacity to reflect upon yourself, imagine alternatives, resist automatic behavior, and deliberately shape your identity. The order describes it as the inner source of self-directed evolution and self-deification. The word deification is going to make some listeners uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable. The order uses it to describe the development of the psyche into something increasingly autonomous and distinct. Instead of dissolving it into God, nature, society, or the collective, the Setian magician tries to strengthen the individual being. From my own religious perspective, consciousness is a gift from the Creator rather than evidence that the human being should become a god. The disagreement is substantial. Still, the psychological question underneath the theology is still interesting. How much of a person's life is chosen? How much is inherited from family, culture, fear, appetite, trauma, and social expectation? The black flame represents the moment a person becomes capable of examining those forces. The order takes that moment toward radical individualism. Other spiritual systems take it toward humility, service, or surrender. Many therapeutic traditions treat it as the beginning of awareness and behavioral choice. Everybody finds the same strange light, and then argues over who lit it. The order's grail is the perfected psyche. Its knights promise loyalty to a personal quest, and honor is measured through faithfulness to that pursuit. The Grail may represent a person's highest possibility, ultimate work, or most complete form of being. It remains pretty unreachable, which keeps the quest alive. The current Grandmaster also draws inspiration from Wolfram von Eschenbach's medieval poem, Parzival, in which the Grail appears as a mysterious stone rather than the familiar cup. That stone has strange properties and bears mysterious writing. Within the order's interpretation, it becomes a predecessor to Lovecraft's shining Trapezohedron. A medieval grail stone and a fictional alien crystal become two versions of the same archetype, an object that contains knowledge and transforms whoever approaches it. The order therefore treats the grail as something beyond a Christian relic. It becomes the hidden truth of the self. The reinterpretation is very much a left-hand path move. A symbol associated with salvation through divine grace is redirected towards self-directed transformation. They do this all the time. The trapezoid is the order's central mystery rather than a concept with one clear definition. Its public material describes the shape as a link between objective and subjective reality, a prism, a gate, and a representation of dimensions that ordinary perception cannot fully grasp. Earlier order material goes further and calls it a gateway towards psyche-centered immortality. This means the psyche would supposedly continue in a dynamic state independent of the physical body. Now, of course, there's no public evidence demonstrating that this has occurred. Dead members have yet to return for a recorded panel discussion. Within the system, however, the idea follows from Setian individualism. If the deepest purpose of life is to construct a distinct and powerful psyche, physical death becomes the ultimate test of that distinction. Can the self remain itself after the body ends? The order answers with aspiration rather than proof. The trapezoid symbolizes the gate through which that survival might become possible. Now, Walhalla, with a W, is both a place and a state. Historically, the word is the German form of Valhall. I think that's how you say it. The Old Norse hall, where selected warriors slain in battle prepare for Ragnarok. The order uses the myth metaphorically. Walhalla represents readiness, dynamism, camaraderie, pleasure, and an existence that continues evolving beyond death. A knight should remain prepared for difficulty, capable of adaptation, and supported by companions sharing the same pursuit. The order also contrasts Walhalla with a static condition in which an underdeveloped psyche gradually dissolves back into the objective universe. This gives the system a kind of afterlife doctrine. A sufficiently developed self may remain dynamic. An undeveloped self eventually disappears. This can be a powerful spiritual motivator. It turns self-development into preparation for death. But it also flatters the initiate. Most elite orders contain some version of the idea that members are developing a capacity unavailable to ordinary people. The challenge is distinguishing disciplined transformation from spiritual vanity. And that problem is hardly unique to occultism. Any tradition can produce a person who mistakes unusual vocabulary for unusual wisdom. The order tries to guard against this through its emphasis on honor, responsibility, and visible accomplishment. Whether that works depends on the individual knight, the leadership, and the honesty of the community around them. A black medallion, as far as I know, has never prevented a human being from becoming ridiculous. Nothing has. The order says its knights swear loyalty beyond death to their philia. Now, I know in Old Norse, the word has a K sound in there somewhere when you say it the original way, but we're just going to say philia. Philia is an Old Norse word connected with following or accompanying. In medieval Norse literature, philia appear as attendant spirits linked to an individual or family. The concept varies across the surviving stories. A philia may appear as an animal that reflects a person's nature. It may emerge in dreams. In some accounts, it behaves like an omen or appears near a moment of danger or death. Weird, like Socrates' divine sign. Other forms resemble female guardian figures connected with a family line. The order translates the concept into guiding the shadow self. That phrase carries a different psychological flavor. Spicy. The shadow is the part of the person moving beside ordinary identity. It may contain instincts, potentials, fears, and knowledge that the conscious personality has not fully integrated. Swearing loyalty to the philia can therefore mean accepting a relationship with the hidden part of oneself. That sounds beautiful until the hidden part begins suggesting things. I think a useful spiritual system needs a way to distinguish insight from impulse. Every intense feeling cannot automatically become a message from the guiding shadow. The psyche contains wisdom, fear, resentment, memory, and occasionally a completely absurd idea that arrives with the confidence of divine revelation. The order places the philia inside a wider structure of oath, honor, and responsibility. In theory, those constraints stop the initiate from treating every private urge as sacred instruction. The mythology also gives each knight a companion on the Grail quest. The initiate appears individualistic, though never entirely alone. The philia represents the deeper self moving ahead, drawing the conscious personality toward the unknown. It resembles the way a future identity can begin influencing present behavior. You imagine the person you may become. That imagined person begins making demands. You train, study, sacrifice, change routines, and leave certain relationships because a version of you that does not exist yet has somehow entered the room and asked you to do these things. The order gives that process a mythic body. It calls the body a shadow. The 9 angles form one of the order's most difficult public teachings. They appear in its emblem, ritual tradition, and internal magical geometry. Flowers associated them with a yantra combining the angles of a trapezoid and a pentagram. The order later recognized a series of year-long workings in which members explored one angle at a time. Most of the detailed interpretations remain internal. A 2019 book by Toby Chappell, called Infernal Geometry and the Left-Hand Path, provides the most extensive public history of the system. It traces the 9 angles through LaVey, Aquino, the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, and the Order of the Trapezoid. The tradition centers on 3 important rites. Excuse how I say this. Die Elektrischen Vorspiel, the ceremony of 9 angles, and the call to Cthulhu. Its influences include Pythagorean number symbolism, John Dee's Enochian system, Lovecraft expressionism, ceremonial magic, and the idea that angular environments can shift consciousness. The word angle works in more than one way. An angle is geometric, but it's also a perspective. To explore another angle means examining reality from a position you have not occupied before. That double meaning fits the order. Its geometry operates as an external image of inner disorientation. The initiate moves away from habitual perspective and enters a symbolic structure where familiar relationships become unstable. This may explain why angular magic has remained so compelling even without physical evidence for supernatural geometry. The practice creates a formal excuse to approach the mind sideways. One warning here. The order's 9 angles should not be confused with the Order of 9 Angles, commonly abbreviated to O9A or ONA. The Order of 9 Angles is a separate British origin extremist network associated with neo-Nazism, criminality, and violent accelerationism. The similar name has caused an enormous amount of confusion online. The Order of the Trapezoid emerged from the American Church of Satan and later became part of the Temple of Set. Its 9 angles belong to that specific angular magic tradition. The British Onine developed its own ideology, structure, and violent political associations. They are different organizations, though I'm not a huge fan of either one. Occult history has enough confusion without accidentally merging every group that owns a ruler. I think, for me, this is where secret societies often become frustrating. What did they actually do? The philosophy is public enough to create interest. The secret practices, though, remain restricted enough to preserve mystery. Based on the Order's own material, members engage in personal magical work, study, ritual, group worships, physical training, and the development of individual quests. The modern website includes martial arts, experimental science, mathematics, and neo-mythology among its areas of interest. That variety makes the Order look less like one standardized occult church and more like a research society organized around a shared symbolic language. One knight may approach the trapezoid through runes, another may work through visual art, geometry, dream exploration, physical discipline, or the deliberate construction of personal mythology. Members are united by the oath and the 4 mysteries rather than a single weekly ceremony. That fits the wider Temple of Set, where ritual work is frequently individual. Setian practice emphasizes self-initiation and personal transformation. The organization provides concepts, relationships, and recognition, while members are expected to perform the actual work themselves. The Order's chivalric language gives that individualism a social boundary. A knight owes duties to the quest, the Order, and a standard of honor. Without that boundary, radical self-deification can become a complicated way of saying, I do whatever I feel like doing. The Order defines honor through justice, ethics, and responsibility, taking priority over comfort or advantage. The definition is surprisingly sober compared with everything surrounding it, like Nazis. The difficult part is enforcement. A secret society judges itself largely through its own internal standards. Outsiders have limited access to the process, while members may become emotionally invested in protecting the Order's image. I'm not saying this proves abuse or corruption, though there have been accusations. It creates the same accountability problem found in many private spiritual communities. Charisma usually hides weakness. Titles usually discourage disagreement. A person who believes their leader has achieved a higher stage of consciousness may reinterpret ordinary misconduct as an advanced teaching that they're too immature to understand. Any initiatory system needs room for someone to say, "Actually, Grandmaster, that sucked." The Order's emphasis on concrete accomplishment may offer some protection against pure fantasy. A knight is expected to function effectively in the world, develop skills, and pursue a meaningful body of work. Still, achievement can also become proof of spiritual superiority, especially inside a system built around elite self-development. This tension runs through the whole Order. Discipline can become vanity. Mystery can become obscurity. Individualism can produce genuine independence, or a person who has become impossible to have lunch with. The public material doesn't give us enough information to judge every internal practice. We can say the Order is active, selective, and more organized than the phrase Lovecraftian satanic knights might initially suggest. It operates as a real initiatory fraternity. Its supernatural claims remain claims. Oh, and they're kind of Nazis. I don't know. Just saying. The Order's history unfolded during a period when nearly any occult group could become the subject of wild criminal rumors. During the 1980s and 1990s, the Satanic Panic spread across America, spread across North America, and parts of Europe. Now, I've heard things that this was a psyop furthered by the Soviets, but I don't know. You should look into that. Therapists, police officers, religious campaigners, and sensationalist media promoted claims that hidden satanic networks were kidnapping children, committing ritual murders, and infiltrating public institutions. Investigations repeatedly failed to uncover the vast conspiracies being described. Until recently, of course, but we haven't talked about the files yet, and I don't think we will for some time. Anyway, the Temple of Set became an obvious target. Its members used inverted pentagrams, called on the Prince of Darkness, performed black magic, and maintained restricted teachings. Aquino combined that profile with a military career, which allowed almost any conspiracy theory to grow around him. Serious allegations were made. Sensational books and broadcasts treated association with the temple as evidence of criminality. The scholar Kenneth Granholm notes that the temple faced accusations ranging from child abuse to fascism and racism. One sensationalist book about the organization was withdrawn after legal action and a finding list that it was libelous. This history creates an uncomfortable research problem. The temple and order deserve scrutiny, especially around their use of Nazi-associated locations and imagery. But I guess they also deserve the same standards of evidence applied to everyone else. I don't like that, but it seems true. A black robe proves ownership of a black robe. An occult title proves that someone enjoys occult titles. Criminal claims require criminal evidence, so I'm not going to say anything right now, but I think you know what I'm getting at. There's some things you can't say on the internet. And if you could say them, then they would. And if someone is saying them, then those are things you can say on the internet. Anyway, the Satanic Panic caused real damage by replacing evidence with atmosphere. People were prosecuted, families were destroyed, and vulnerable patients were encouraged to construct elaborate memories under suggestive therapeutic practices. Now, I'm not saying this didn't happen. We should probably talk about the Satanic Panic another time, because there were things going on and there are things going on in the world right now that would justify a satanic panic. But I think the theatrical behavior of groups such as the Church of Satan made the panic easier to sell. So of course there are evil Satanists, but I don't know what this whole thing was about. LaVey deliberately cultivated the image of a dangerous black magician. He wanted attention, and he got far more than he could control. The Temple of Set moved away from some of LaVey's carnival presentation, though its language remained provocative. Calling your central divinity the Prince of Darkness will definitely always complicate the press release. The Order occupies this weird position where it's both less sensational and more esoteric than outsiders assume. Its public philosophy focuses heavily on self-development, honor, mythology, and consciousness. Its imagery still draws from sources designed to provoke fear. That combination guarantees misunderstanding, but it could also be part of the appeal. A path feels more secret when the outside world thinks it's dangerous. We do need to return to Wewelsburg, though. The Order says Aquino entered the castle to reclaim German Romanticism from the place where it had been corrupted. Can that be done? Symbols do change. The swastika existed across Asia and other regions for centuries before Nazism. Its older religious meanings remain alive in those cultures, even though Western audiences usually encounter the Nazi association first. Runes also predate the Third Reich. Modern heathens, historians, artists, and language scholars use them without endorsing fascism. This is why context is so important. The Order's problem is that it did not merely study Germanic symbolism in a neutral location. Its foundational ritual took place inside Wewelsburg, followed by the drafting of its emblem at Hitler's eagle's nest. Those choices created a direct symbolic relationship with Nazi sites and Nazis. If you believe in magic, if you believe in all of this non-physical stuff, then Aquino knew what he was doing. So his explanation doesn't match the supposed values that he carries within him. Aquino explained the act as confrontation and transformation. The castle's darkness was supposedly the material being worked upon. A critic could reasonably say the act risked repeating the old fascination while claiming to overcome it. There's also a political lesson here. Fascism is extremely skilled at aesthetic theft. It takes old myths, heroic images, folk traditions, sacred symbols, and natural human desires for belonging, then rearranges them around hierarchy, purity, and violence. People may later try to rescue the stolen material. The rescue requires more than declaring that the original meaning has returned. It requires attention to victims, historical truth, and the ways symbols continue operating in the present. The Wewelsburg Museum now deals directly with the post-war occult mythology of the site. It emphasizes that the famous chambers were unfinished and unused, while documenting the suffering of prisoners forced to build the SS complex. That approach removes the supernatural glamour and returns human beings to the center of the story. The Order does the opposite in some of its writing. The castle becomes this kind of magical crossroads where currents of Romanticism and Lovecraftian expressionism are joined. Both stories refer to the same stone room. One story asks what happened to the prisoners. The other asks what happened to the magician. And that difference is where you should pay attention. This doesn't automatically make every member of the Order a fascist. The available evidence does not support that kind of blanket statement. The Order publicly frames its chivalric ethic around personal honor and responsibility rather than racial politics. Its origin myth still depends on an aesthetic encounter with Wewelsburg, so the contradiction remains. Perhaps that is one reason the Order continues to interest people. It tries to build an ethic of honor inside imagery associated with one of history's most dishonorable regimes. Whether that is transformation or dangerous romanticism cannot be settled by the Order's own declaration. We have to examine what the symbols produce. Lovecraft and the Order share a deep concern with human limitation. Lovecraft's characters discover that ordinary reality sits inside something larger, weirder, and less hospitable. Knowledge destabilizes them. The universe does not confirm their importance. The Order takes similar imagery and reverses the emotional direction. Where Lovecraft sees cosmic insignificance, the magician sees an initiatory challenge. The alien geometry that destroys an ordinary person may strengthen the initiate. The forbidden book becomes a manual. The monster becomes a source of knowledge. The abyss becomes a mirror. This is one of the classic operations of the left-hand path. A symbol of fear, exile, or condemnation is approached deliberately. The practitioner tries to absorb the power of whatever society rejects. Sometimes this produces psychological freedom. A person raised in shame may find value in reclaiming the body, anger, ambition, or aspects of identity they were taught to hate. The same method can be reckless when transgression turns into a goal by itself. Crossing a boundary can reveal that that boundary was unnecessary. It can also reveal why the boundary was there. The order tries to control that danger through honor and initiation. Members are supposed to develop the judgment required to approach destabilizing material without being consumed by it. Lovecraft supplies the perfect fictional model. The shining Trapezohedron gives knowledge while establishing contact with something dangerous. The person looking into it must be capable of surviving the gaze coming back. That is almost a complete metaphor for occult practice. You begin with curiosity. The material activates something inside you. Soon, you're no longer studying an idea from a safe distance. The idea has entered your identity, your dreams, your language, and your relationships with other people. At that point, the quality of the practitioner matters more than the exotic nature of the symbol. A disciplined person may use the encounter to become more honest. A frightened person may build a paranoid universe. A narcissistic person might emerge convinced that they have been selected by ancient forces to begin posting 40-minute videos from inside their car. Maybe that was me. Anyway, I think mystery magnifies whatever enters it. The Order of the Trapezoid has spent decades constructing a chamber of symbolic amplification. The castle, the black flame, the grail, the runes, the shadow companion, and the alien stone all point toward the same experience. The self encounters something hidden and returns changed. The question is whether that change produces wisdom. After spending so much time studying the order and meeting members in my real life, I don't think its deepest secret is a ritual. It probably does have private rituals, passwords, oaths, internal documents, and explanations of the 9 angles that the public never sees. Those things create the container. The real secret, though, is simpler. Human beings can consciously construct myths and then live inside them. We do this constantly. A nation creates stories about its founders. A family repeats an account of who belongs and who causes trouble. A company invents a mission statement and slowly begins treating it as a moral identity. A person decides they're a failure, a survivor, a warrior, a victim, or an outsider. The story shapes perception, and our perception shapes our behavior. Behavior produces evidence that appears to confirm the story. The order does this process deliberately. It takes a person and says, "You are now a squire approaching knighthood. Your life is a grail quest. Your hidden psyche has a guiding shadow. Consciousness is a black flame. Difficulty is training. Death is a gate. The unknown is Runa, calling you forward." That story will affect a person. Whether the metaphysics are true becomes only one part of the issue. The myth has already entered the nervous system. Religions, therapies, military units, and athletic teams all understand versions of this process. Identity can organize action more powerfully than information alone. The danger appears when the story becomes immune to correction. A healthy myth can help a person face reality, but an unhealthy myth replaces reality and punishes anyone who notices. The order claims to unite subjective transformation with objective accomplishment. That is probably its most important safeguard. The knight must eventually come out of the chamber and live. The same standard is useful for any spiritual path. Does it make you more honest? Can you accept correction? Do your relationships improve? Are you becoming more responsible? Can you function without needing everyone else to recognize your special rank? Does the mystery deepen your humanity, or does it just provide somewhere to hide from it? Those questions do more work than the shape of the altar. In Lovecraft's story, Robert Blake finds a shining object inside a dark church. He looks into it and sees other worlds. Then he realizes something in those worlds can see him. The Order of the Trapezoid took that image and built a spiritual fraternity around it. Anton LaVey transformed strange geometry into ritual theater and gave the order its first organizational form. Michael Aquino carried the idea into the Temple of Set, entered the crypt beneath Wewelsburg, and declared the order reborn as a chivalric school. Stephen Flowers filled it with runes, Germanic mysticism, the Polarian method, and the pursuit of runa. Later grandmasters continued developing the Grail, the Nine Angles, neo-mythology, and the promise of a psyche strong enough to remain dynamic beyond death. The order still exists. Its current website presents an active organization led by a 7th Grandmaster. It still accepts qualified candidates through the Temple of Set. Its knights and dames continue working inside a mythology assembled from medieval poetry, Norse literature, modern Satanism, Egyptian religion, horror fiction, and one of the most morally burdened castles in Europe. There's no good evidence that trapezoids open portals. The Order has nevertheless opened a window into something real about human beings. We are myth-making creatures. We can take a shape from a mathematics lesson, place it inside a horror story, carry it into a ritual chamber, draw it in a castle, and eventually swear an oath to whatever we believe it represents. That power deserves respect and caution. A symbol can help someone understand the hidden parts of their life, but it can also make a fantasy feel more authoritative than evidence. The difference depends on the character of the person looking into it. Every spiritual practice eventually becomes a kind of reflective surface. We enter hoping to see the universe, God, the unconscious, the future, or some secret structure beneath reality. Much of the time, we meet ourselves. That encounter can be scary. The thing in the dark knows our name, shares our memories, and speaks in a voice that feels older than we are. Perhaps the safest approach is to remember what Blake forgot. Whenever you look deeply into a symbol, a tradition, or a mystery, the experience changes the person doing the looking. The window looks back. This has been Idiot Mystic. Thank you for spending this too much amount of time with me inside the Order of the Trapezoid. I still think it was a psychological operation, but that's a different video. Take care of yourself, please. Keep your lights working. And should you ever discover a glowing, many-sided crystal inside an abandoned church, leave it alone. We already have enough podcasts.